All right, excellent. Why don't we get started? All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where all of you are located across the country. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on how education leaders are using state test data for pandemic recovery. And thanks so much to, in advance, the Collaborative for Student Success and the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry for hosting this event today. This is a really important and timely topic, I think. And we've got some really outstanding panelists that are joining us here today, sort of dive into what they're doing in the respective states and to hopefully share some knowledge that we can sort of spread more broadly. I'm eager to get into introductions and into the meat of the conversation today, but before we do that, we wanted to get a sense of where each of you as audience members are coming from when it comes to this topic. So to that end, we have a poll that we are got a couple questions. The first question, if you would take a moment, on a scale of 1 to 4, to what extent do you feel able to make a strong case for why state assessment should be administered this year? With 1 being the lowest, the least able, and 4 being the most able. We just want to get a sense of sort of where folks are before we dive in. So take a minute, 45 seconds to fill out the poll, if you will. Maybe just like 15 more seconds. If you haven't had a chance to fill out your answer, take a moment now to click the number that sort of is most closely describes where you are. All right, excellent. Okay, all right. So definitely a plurality number 3, certainly not a majority, but 3 and 4 pushing towards that. Great. Thank you so much for taking a moment to answer that question. And then we have one more question for you, in case you missed the first one, or just for everybody. On a scale of 1 to 4, to what extent do you feel able to explain how state assessment data will be used to guide pandemic recovery efforts or school-based resource allocations? Again, someone take a minute, 45 seconds, 1, 2, 3, or 4, 1 being totally unable, 4 being you've got it totally covered in terms of being able to explain how state testing data in your state will be used to guide recovery. Okay, so it's pretty evenly divided between 2 and 3. It looks like on this question. So okay, great, super helpful for us to see as we dive into our conversation today. So with that, let's take a moment. I'd like to introduce the esteemed panel we have here today. First off, we have Commissioner Penny Schwinn from the Tennessee Department of Education. So delighted to have Penny here today. We have Superintendent Carey Wright from the Mississippi Department of Education. Thank you, Carey, for being here today. Secretary Johnny Key from the Arkansas Division of Elementary and Secondary Education. Thanks so much for being here, Johnny. And we have Bradley Jackson, President and CEO of Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Bradley, thank you for joining us. And to all 4 of you, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to impart some knowledge with the audience here today. So first, I'd love to start off with a question for Commissioner Schwinn, to Penny, in terms of if you would take a moment here, just essentially make the case for state assessment in Tennessee. Why is the state of Tennessee so committed to testing as many students as possible this year, especially in this broader context where folks are concerned about lost instructional time and stress on students? There's all these reasons, but explain sort of in light of that why Tennessee has been so committed to state assessment.
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate that question and just the opportunity to frame. And at the core, we have to know how our students are doing, and we need to make sure that that's both at the state level and at the parent level. Parents want to know how their students have progressed this year more than ever. We're seeing more parent engagement in a lot of our initiatives than we ever have before, and there's this craving for more information and knowledge. And at the state level, it's really important for us to be able to measure longitudinally how students are doing over time and the impact of the pandemic. That has to be normed. And so I do want to frame that there's lots of different assessments folks are going to give across the state and across districts, but we need to make sure we have a consistent and standardized way of measuring achievement so that we can know how we are doing as a state. From Tennessee's perspective, we wanted to make sure that we were planning effectively. So on the front end, we extended our window and gave districts lots of different options in terms of when they could test so that they could have a longer window, they could accommodate the needs of their students. We did pre-equating so we could have some rolling scoring. So that way, if you're in the earlier window, you're able to get your data back faster. We've got districts who got their data back just last week. Now that's going to be a minute before it gets to families, but all of our districts will be able to have that scoring back to them within 2 to 3 weeks of assessment. We also offered flexibility so that students could take assessments in places where their families felt safe. So if students did not want to come to the school building, there are alternative sites where students were able to test this year. I think the second part of that is the support that is being provided. And so as you well know, Tennessee has a long history of supporting assessment, and we're seeing that from the vast majority of our districts. They want to know how their students are doing on that very consistent measure over time. And we've got a lot of leaders in the state, and I'm going to call out folks like our superintendent in Dixon County, who I think very early said, this is incredibly important that we see how our kids are doing so that we can invest in a more effective way. We know that our businesses look at the data both to recruit new industry into the state, and then also our existing businesses want to know how our students are progressing across the state over time so that they can make sure to give that feedback back to the department. They can think very critically about the supports they need for our graduates who are coming into jobs and careers outside of K-12, and certainly we see the same thing in higher ed. And I want to say, I'm also the parent of a first-time test taker. So I'm a first-time test-taking parent. My older daughter is in 3rd grade. So this was quite a year for me to experience that on the other side. And I think that there is a real conversation around the stress that folks are feeling with the pandemic. But I want to push a little bit and say that a lot of that is adult stress. We feel the accountability, we feel the need to continue to push and accelerate achievement. But when I talk to young kids, and even with my own daughter, knowing what I do for a living, she was thrilled to be able to go into testing, and it was show what you know, and this is just like any other day. And the thing I got the most pushback on was she said, what's the good of you being commissioner if I can't get my score right away? And so we had a little bit of that more in our house than anything else. But it's that idea of needing to balance. And I think it was really important in Tennessee for us to do the legislation that happened earlier in January, which did put a hold harmless. Our teachers are not going to have the test scores used in their evaluations this year. Our districts have a hold harmless from accountability as long as they test enough students, and then we put that at an 80% threshold. So trying to balance the stress of this year with also saying we've got to know how our kids are doing. And in terms of why that matters moving forward and in the front look, we need to be able to have, like I said, that longitudinal data over time. We need to be able to see how our kids did 5 years ago, 3 years ago, this year, and then moving forward to know the impact of the pandemic. We need to be able to really emphasize how our investments with this new federal funding are aligned to the needs of the students in our state in this moment. And that has to be on a consistent measure. And we also know that now is a time where we can really innovate in the assessment space, but you can't innovate if you don't have something to root to. That's irresponsible. So you cannot actually responsibly move testing forward in a conversation about innovative assessment if you can't benchmark against existing data. And all of those reasons are why it's so important for us to continue to have those data points for students, especially since we didn't have them last year, because there's so much money at stake, and we've got to make sure we're strategically investing that to accelerate achievement even further.
Super helpful. Thanks so much, Penny. What a great way to set the stage for the conversation today. So fantastic. I'd like to turn now to Bradley. From your perspective at the chamber, give us the business perspective or the business case for state assessment. What advice would you give to a state chamber or to a local business on how to make the case for state assessments this year?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this this issue. It's been vitally important for the Tennessee Chamber on behalf of the business community, which really started for us around 2007 when major education reforms came into play here in Tennessee. So I would say that really for the business community, assessments equal accountability. So, accountability is really embedded whenever you talk to business leaders. It's the thought process that they have with regard to anything they approach, of where you make sure you are achieving really the outcomes that you want, and that you can assess and have an idea really for that progress, where you need to improve, changes that you need to make, because at the end of the day, it's really focused on the results that businesses look for. Also, as an indicator of workforce readiness, I think that's vitally important for the business community. We frequently, communicate and hear from businesses, their number one challenge, it's not taxes or workers' compensation or anything else. It's really their workforce. Their workforce is their most important asset, and having a strong pipeline for them to be able to grow and succeed is vitally important. So we've advocated for a number of years and supported those high academic standards in our state. So a good assessment makes sure that those standards are being learned, so students can graduate ready for the workforce, or additional post-secondary training as well. We talked to you about workforce readiness. We know we want to see students succeed, and assessments also play a significant role in that, we believe, making sure that they have the skills and knowledge really to pursue career paths after their graduation that they're interested in and that they are prepared for. I know frequently hear the story of, I grew up with an individual where they put in a lot of effort into going down a career path that when they really didn't know what they were getting into, or just weren't overall prepared for it, and it ended up setting them back. And we don't want to see that for our students. We want to see them succeed. Really, kind of in closing my comments, I'll focus on too. We really have a once in a lifetime opportunity to leverage essential and significant resources recently that as a result from the pandemic that's come down, state and local schools, to give students who went through the pandemic, to give them the support and help them to really recover with some of the learning loss that they've had. This is a crucial opportunity, and assessments are really key to that, and making sure that we can do that effectively.
Right, thank you so much, Bradley. Appreciate that. In a moment, I'm going to bring in Johnny and Carey to this conversation as well. But again, just for a moment here, I want to turn to you as the audience in terms of a question that we have for you. So to the extent you've been engaged in this conversation in your respective states, and this is the answer for this question, we'd love for you to put in the chat box, again, just so we can sort of see us, all of us can get a sense of sort of what you've been seeing and hearing. But the question we have to each of you is, what is the hardest question you've had to answer about state assessments? It could be this year or just even more broadly. But if you take a couple minutes to put your answer in the chat box, that would be great. Lots of great answers showing up in the chat box. Continue to put them in there, but just, a lot of these things, we hear in terms of the validity of the tests, sort of the timing in terms of when the results come back. Again, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? So let's not test, let's do all these other things that we feel are even more important for kids. Alignment, fairness. This is great. And I'm sure, we may not be able to touch on all of these today, but our hope is with this information, we'll be able to help each of your respective states in terms of some of the messaging around some of these concerns. Fantastic. All right, so please continue to put your answers into the chat box. What I'd like to do now is like to bring in Superintendent Wright and Commissioner Key into the polling questions we had, right? I guess Johnny or Carey, either of you first, just with that first question in terms of how do you make the case for state assessments this year? We'd love to hear from each of you on that question in your respective states.
Well, I'll be happy to start. I think this year, particularly, the state assessments are going to be critical for us. I think everybody has the right to know, whether it's students or parents or staff, and particularly the State Department in terms of resources, exactly what was the impact on the pandemic. And I think it helps us identify where students are having strengths, where they need to continue to improve. I think it's also going to help us direct those resources that we have to the children that need them the most. And so we're intending to use our state information for those purposes. We did the same kinds of things that Penny talked about. We extended the window. We tried to make it as easy as possible for children to be assessed. We promised our teachers that the results would be back in late June or early July. We too had a lot of waivers in place so that we, took away some of that stress of not having to do that. Our districts are looking very seriously now at all of their ESSER money, because now that summer learning is coming on, they want to know what kind of programs to design, for whom, and in what areas. We're also hearing a lot of discussion around targeted tutoring and those children that are going to need particular additional help in order to get that done. And to be honest with you, we're using this data to really drive what we're planning on doing around professional development. We use a lot of our own statewide professional development, and that we need these data back to inform us about what our teachers need and what our leaders need and what our parents need, because we've been hearing from parents too that they would love to have some professional development in order to better be able to assist their children at home. Like a lot of states, we've had that third grade assessment that children have to pass in order to be promoted to fourth grade. And although we waived that this year, we also expect then that there's going to be a fair number of fourth graders who are passed on into fourth grade that are still struggling in reading. And we need to be able to provide that kind of help. We've got literacy coaches that we deploy across the state in those schools and districts that are really struggling. And so we need to know how to deploy those. Our legislature gave us money this year for math coaches. And so the same is going to be true. We're going to be looking at that math data to know how to deploy our math coaches. So I think this is a time, and we've been talking about this since September, to be honest with you, and the superintendents have been very supportive about this. I think they too want to know the lay of the land, because I feel that waiting more than another year would not have been conducive to knowing exactly, I call it the state of education in Mississippi, and knowing then how to use those data and use those data wisely.
Well, from Arkansas standpoint, I think it would be a mistake to look at the year-end assessment as a standalone piece. It really has to be part of an overall assessment system. And, when you lose a piece of that system, a vital component of that system, then really it makes the whole picture harder to read and interpret. We've been in-person instruction. About 80% of our students have had in-person instruction since August 24th. We have just finished our assessment window for our year-end assessment, and statewide we have had over 95% tested, which we're thrilled. We made whatever accommodations that we could, short of actually allowing testing at home. We did everything we could to provide the flexibility similar to what Penny mentioned that they did in Tennessee. because it was important to have that data piece for you think about, we had 80% of our students were in person, but we also had a number who were totally at home through a digital platform of some kind. And we also had many who were in hybrid of some type, where they were in and they were out. We refined our data system so that we could collect and understand at the student level, what were those students experiencing, and how then with this year-end data, does that line up to what they experienced? So we can, by later in the summer, early fall, we'll be able to see, did our virtual system do what we wanted it to do at the state level, at the district level, at the building level. And we believe we can even get it down to the classroom level. That's information that districts will be able to use to help improve their processes. We don't know what COVID's going to do. We all feel good right now that maybe the past or the worst is behind us, but we really don't know. And without this assessment data, to use it to help us prepare for what could come later, we think that's one of the biggest reasons to go ahead and pursue this, which is why we did it. Our Governor Hutchinson was resolute from the very beginning, even back to last April when we were in the middle of the height of COVID, that we were going to have a normal or as normal as possible school year. We needed to be prepared to shift to virtual if necessary. And then parents demanded a virtual platform in every district. So every district had some type of virtual option. And so measuring how through the course of the year, the ups and downs, some districts didn't have to pivot to virtual at all. Other districts had to pivot several times through the year. Some were by grade level, some were by individual school building. So we have a number of variables that we want to be able to look at, and the state assessment data will help us. But we also understood that because it was part of a broader system, we needed to give that the real-time impact and opportunities for teachers to see that real-time impact. So we expanded our K2 assessment system, which is a series of interim assessments required by Arkansas statute. We expanded that to K8. So through eighth grade, we had a process through the year that it was not to be an assessment event, but part of that interim process of determining how are our students learning and making those adjustments. So we're not waiting on this year-end assessment to really make the adjustments we need to make. We've been doing that all along. This helps us just really hone in on the bigger picture and make those comparisons going forward, and using it to help us direct the federal funds that have been allocated to the state and to the districts so that the improvements can be made moving forward to the instruction process. You can't separate assessment from instruction. They're connected, and if you have it as an assessment as a separate entity, it doesn't generate the value. I think that's the important part of the message here is that without the assessment, you're not going to learn what you need to learn about the instructional processes.
Thank you, Johnny, and thank you, Carey, as well. I think sort of a common theme that's clear across all three of you, including Penny, is just how resolute you've been on assessment and how you've stuck with it. You believe in assessment as one of many important sort of tools you can leverage in terms of the federal dollars that are coming. For the next question I have, I'd like to bring all three of you, get all three of your thoughts on this, is the question of innovation in the world of assessment. So even sort of higher elevation than what we've been talking about thus far. I mean, certainly through the pandemic, we've seen some of the limitations of standardized tests, but the truth is even before the pandemic, we knew that there are trade-offs, right? Love to hear from each of you. We'll start with Penny first, then we'll come back to you, Johnny, and then we'll have Carey wrap up. And what are the plans right now in your state when it comes to state assessment, not only in terms of 2022, I know I'm sort of asking you this, that's we're in the midst of 2021, but looking towards 2022 and beyond, what are you guys thinking about in terms of innovation with regard to state assessments in your state? So Penny, if you would go first, that would be great.
Sure. So I think we're bucketing this into three categories. And the first is really around lessons learned from the pandemic and what we can continue to expand upon. So in our special session, the General Assembly passed some of our innovative assessment benchmarks. What that allows is for us to really expand on some of the work we did with online interim assessments within the state so that we can create what we call little testlets. Those are curriculum aligned assessments with our state test version of questions so that teachers can actually see smaller test forms aligned to the instructional materials that they are teaching and that they can actually measure what they are teaching on state level questions. So making sure that we have that partnership and that walks through the entire year. So we're building out those testlets and benchmarks to be able to better match our curricular decisions that are happening at the local level. So that's one kind of immediate, I think, impact of what we're doing to respond to the pandemic and I think innovative moving forward. But moving beyond that, the two other buckets we look at are just the timing and cadence of assessment and then matching that with the types of assessments that we have. So we're looking at innovation and saying, how can we actually move away from potentially a one test, one day model and say that we want to make sure that we are giving teachers that feedback throughout the year, that just like real life, we're allowing students to retake questions and retake some of the questions that are aligned to standards when they don't master them in October. Some students are going to need more time. If I get that data back as a teacher, I'm able to reteach in that year with my student and then retest. And I think that level of success and building and growth that we all value as educators, we have to embed that into our assessments, again, so we are aligning our practice with how we use assessment and how that informs our practice. And so we're really looking at kind of the timing of tests and how we aggregate that into one final score, but making it a more meaningful process and frankly, reducing overall test minutes because now we can reduce district level and school-based assessments where we know kids are taking 3 or 4 tests on the same thing. And then the third bucket we're looking at is item types. We really, there's a lot of great items out there. We also want to move a little bit more into items that give feedback to students in real time. So if you are writing an essay in your profession or in college, you write, you revise, you get feedback, and you move through that process. How do we create assessment items that have that same level of interaction with the student that allows the student to be able to get that feedback and make corrections, and we're actually scoring that, where a student can walk through their work in the same way that they might in a job or in higher education, but having a more interactive experience so that students, I think, are more engaged, frankly, in the assessment. And again, we are measuring something that is more meaningful to what the child's experience will be when they leave K-12 and enter either college, some kind of post-secondary program, and then eventually workforce.
Yeah, so we have an opportunity because we learned within the last few months, our current provider, ACT Aspire, they are going to be moving away from their current platform by 2023. So, over the next 2 years, we are, and actually starting this summer, we're going to be engaging educators around the state. And we have an idea of what they want, but formally, we are going to be engaging them in a process of identifying what it is they want to see, what would be helpful to them, and looking at it through the year model. That is something that we would look at. When we moved from Park to ACT Aspire, one of the common themes we heard was, well, we want some consistency because we had 3 assessments in 3 years. Our state developed assessment, and then we went to Park and then moved away from Park. So this time that we've had with ACT Aspire has been, it's kind of settled the waters, so to speak. But now we have the opportunity to move to that next level. What is a better way of assessing the abilities and what students have learned aligned with our state standards? And that's something that we're really excited about. We don't know what that looks like just yet, but we know that our educators are very informed. Many of the comments that have been put in the chat about state assessment, we hear the same thing from our educators. It's really about telling me what's going on with my students so that it can inform learning and inform instruction. So we've got a timeliness factor that is missed often with a state assessment, year-end assessment. What is it aligned with our standards? That's an ongoing issue that obviously comes up in probably every state. And then, how do we get to that year end and meet the federal requirements? So, so far I'm encouraged that the U.S. Department of Education has been encouraging states to look at different models. We feel confident that we'll be able to work with our educators to develop a model that by 23, 24, we'll be able to roll that out in a way that, again, reduces that time to test, gives us something through the year that's more informative and actionable, and really is something that parents can understand better. Because it really aligns with more of that reporting time that they are accustomed to seeing, whether it's 6 weeks or 9 weeks. So we're looking forward to that conversation.
Well, our assessment system has really been a very critical part of our work to improve student outcomes. And when we raised our standards to the most rigorous standards that we've ever had, we deliberately made a decision to involve our teachers in the development of the new assessment that is aligned to the standards. I wanted to make sure that teachers were involved, that they had confidence that when they administered the assessment that they had been working on and developing, that it was aligned to what they were teaching. So there was a lot of transparency there, and the teachers that were involved in that and have remained involved in that have said it's probably some of the best professional development that they've ever had. We too, just like Johnny said, we had gone through 3 different assessments. We had gone from the old state assessment to Park, and then from Park to a brand new assessment. And the teachers were looking for some stability there as well. So when we started the new assessment in 2016, we only had 1/3 of our students that were reading on or above grade level in ELA and also with mathematics. And when we administered it again in 19, we had over 50%. So we knew using this data was driving, as I said before, the professional development that we were offering. And our teachers have been involved in this every single step of the way. I think for me, and I'm going to echo what Penny said, I'm really looking at a quicker way to give teachers data in their hands throughout the year. And I think that's the reason we're trying to look at formative assessments, like Johnny just mentioned too, that are aligned to our state summative. Because I think teachers would welcome a formative assessment that they knew was aligned to their statewide assessment. Because right now, we really can't say whether a lot of these commercially purchased benchmark assessments are aligned to the standards or not. But if we could be guaranteed that we could have a formative assessment that was aligned and teachers could get the information back sooner, I think that they would welcome that. I think that teachers we involve them in every single thing that we do. And we've been very deliberate about that. And so as we look at our assessment system and our accountability system, I think we're trying to look at our accountability system probably a little bit more scrutinizing that this year in terms of its implementation next year, to add more issues around career readiness. You know, we talk about college readiness, but we hear loud and clear from our business community that they also want to know, are students career ready? And so what would that measure look like? What would it take? And so we have been working with our legislature on that as well, because obviously that's going to be a funding mechanism if we're administering something that's not currently being funded. But I think that we've got to make sure that our accountability system reflects not only college readiness, but career readiness, so that businesses can be confident that when children walk the stage in Mississippi, that they are ready for a career or they're ready to go on to college.
Thank you, Carey. Thank you, Johnny. Carey, I like how you brought up sort of the accountability piece. I think one of the challenges in this whole conversation is, you know, for better or for worse, assessment and accountability have almost just become synonymous terms, right? And I've heard folks make the argument that even if we could come up with sort of the perfect assessment, so long as the accountability metrics aren't right, it's still going to create some of the same problems that we have here, you know, that we're dealing with. So all that said, so we've had a chance to look ahead. Let's come back to the here and now, right? Where school years are wrapping up, right? And going into the summer, heading into the fall, really states, districts are getting into recovery mode, or will soon be in recovery mode if they're not already in recovery mode. I'm interested in hearing a lot of the questions around assessment, especially the here and now with states that are really pursuing administering them, like all 3 of your respective states have. The question has been about, you know, how are you actually going to be using this data that you're going to get, right? Certainly, it sounds like some of your participation rates are higher, so you might have some of the challenges in other states that have lower participation rates. But to the extent, if you could get really concrete on how you're going to use this data to support recovery, that would be super helpful. And Carey, you talked a little bit at the top of your remarks about the deployment of coaches, right, professional development, sort of heading in this direction. But we'll have to hear from all three of you in terms of just concrete examples you can provide. As you said, once you have this data in hand, how you're going to apply it in terms of deploying resources in your respective states.
Did you want anyone?
Yeah, this one is like a free-for-all. Whoever wants to jump in.
Well, I will reiterate, we use our data constantly. And one big strategy that we've had for several years now is building the capacity of teachers and leaders. And so when we get our data back, the one thing that we look at is where are we as a state in any of those areas to make sure that is it something that we need to be doing additionally with our teachers and leaders in terms of building their capacity around particular areas in English language arts or writing or mathematics, whatever those areas are. And we've also been working to refine our parent reports, because I think it's really important that parents understand the value of this, and they need to know not only how well their child is doing, but how well their school is doing, and how well is their school doing compared to other schools. And I think one thing that we've been saying too around assessment is that if you're administering a commercial product and you get your statewide assessment results and those are very different, then you need to really be sitting down with a teacher and finding out why. So if your commercially product benchmark is saying, oh yeah, they're great, and then they're not doing well on statewide assessments, which is where all the standards are being assessed, then that's really, I think, an issue that parents and schools need to have a conversation about. But I think that deploying coaches, I mean, our legislature has been very generous with the money that they've given us for literacy coaches and now for math coaches. And so we literally take all that statewide data and say, where are schools struggling the most? And that's then how we deploy our literacy coaches. And that is how we're going to be deploying our math coaches, because they're there to work with teachers to make them even better than they are right now. And it's not a finger pointing exercise. It's a side by side. Let me come alongside you and provide feedback to you, model lessons for you, whatever it may be, because we are a huge science of reading state. All our PD has all been around the science of reading and teaching the foundational skills of reading, and teachers need to know how to do that and know how to diagnose children's issues. So we use data, our assessment data, all the time, and so that's one of the reasons we feel so strongly about our statewide assessment data right now.
Same here in Arkansas, and just to note that it is a data point. The statewide assessment is one data point of many that we have to look at. It's a critical one, and that's why missing that last year really it challenged us to figure out, well, what is it, what we need to do? How do we need to focus this year? Because we did have a big that big missing piece, which is one of the reasons we extended our K2 and made that available to K8, not for accountability, capital A accountability, but for that local, that small a accountability that happens even at the classroom level. But one of the concrete things we are doing moving forward is we recently negotiated a contract with, it's actually an Arkansas company, but they've developed an early warning system, if you will. It's called Smart Data. And they've been a partner in the special ed sector for a number of years, but they've expanded, and this Smart Data system will take not just our state assessment data, but also those social emotional learning indicators, discipline, you name it. It's going to come in, and it's going to really give a student level perspective that teachers will be able to use to say, you know what, maybe we missed something here. They did fine on their assessment, but there's something else here that is off. And what are the supports that may be non-academic supports that we need to bring to bear? Graduation rate. Think about the graduating class 4 years from now. if we have 2 years of state assessment data that is missing, how are we going to know those 8th graders and those 9th graders what they need to head off missing credits? If we know once they miss get 1 credit, or they have to catch up on a math credit or an English credit, we increase exponentially their risk of dropping out. All of these things are going to work, and the state assessment data will be part of that to look at a student level picture of what do they need. And then when we see high numbers, maybe in a district or in a particular school, then those other resources can be brought to bear. Coaching is a huge part of that. Our legislature and governor just approved us to expand our career coaches program. Our career coaches program has been in about half of our counties, so about 37, 38 counties. We want to expand that to all 75 counties, because that is a game changer for those typically underserved students, those historically underserved students that have someone else that comes along beside them that, like this career coach does. We see increases in ACT composite scores. We see increases in FAFSA completion. We see increases in the number of students going on to a 2-year, either a associate's program, certificate program, or a 4-year program. That's the type of data that we will use to direct where those coaches go, to make sure that we don't have 4 years from now a segment of students that somehow we lost, and we lost them because we didn't catch the data this year.
And I agree with both Johnny and with Carey. I think from Tennessee's perspective, we look at it as a staged process. So first is, what does the data say? And some of the conversations that I'll have with parents specific to, well, why is it important that my child is part of that data set? And it's every single student who takes an assessment becomes part of that entire data set. And so you are now counted. It's a little bit like voting. If you don't vote, then you're not heard. And so whatever, if I think about my children, I want to make sure they're taking the assessment because I want them to be considered in a state investment strategy. So we look at, what does the data say? Then we go into, well, why do we need to invest in that way? So it gives us a justification and a needs assessment, especially after this year, to say, here are areas where we have found potentially gaps, or we didn't see as much growth and acceleration as we expected or have seen in prior years. And maybe that's overall, maybe that's in certain content areas, maybe that's in certain regions or with certain student groups. And we are looking at things not just in a traditional way. We're saying we need to look at the difference between our urban, our rural, and our suburban communities based on technology access from spring of last year, for example, or our students with disabilities might have been more disproportionately impacted in these content areas and grades for these reasons. So it really gives us that needs assessment of the justification for why we are investing our dollars in this way. And then we use the data ongoing over time to show how our investments worked, or frankly, if they didn't work. So we have to be able to show that longitudinal data and say, on the same assessment, we saw the need was here in spring of 21. And now in spring of 22, we can see those same students and what happened or what the impact was from the state investment or the local investment, and show that continuity. And frankly, there's implications for state funding. And if we see things that are working or not working, it gives the state a better position to say, here's policy that we might want to consider to move our state forward, or we might not want to invest in this thing that we thought was going to be really great because our data is showing it didn't work. So we're using all of that, and it does require a standard data set. It requires that to be tested across all of our student groups and areas to show the impact at scale. And then I think finally what we're looking at is just, what do you do with that at the different levels? And so certainly that's what we do at the state. Districts are using similar information. It's also a good comparison point for local benchmarks. They want to make sure those local benchmarks are as rigorous as what they're seeing at the state level, because that's what's informing their progress over time. And then from a parent perspective, and there's so much good work having been done, with parent reports and resources and tools, we want to be able to use that data, create friendly parent reports. We've made a big step this year in moving forward in that space, but continue that to say, with all of the online resources that we've created as a country, and certainly in our individual states for families, We need to be able to say, here is the data at the state level, and we can very intentionally connect that to specific resources targeted to your child. That personalization for families only helps to accelerate our achievement more. That can't happen if we're all taking different tests at different times. And in Tennessee, what we've really been thinking about is that at all levels. So making sure that we are doing a universal screener with new legislation we're thrilled about, to be able to see how our students are doing in literacy in those early grades. We obviously have our TCAP, our state assessment. We had more students take the ACT this year than any other state, and that's that push. But you're feeling that push because our families, our districts, our educators really want to know how our students are doing over time. We need to be able to communicate that effectively and then measure growth year over year, so that we know what's working and what's not, because the last thing we need to do is invest in things that aren't working, and we have an accountability on ourselves to make sure we're investing in the things that do.
Great, thank you, Betty, and Carey and Johnny. I think one thing that's come clear to me, just sort of hearing all three of you share what you're doing in your states, how do you deal with the variability within states and so forth, is the importance of state leadership on this topic. And I think everyone in the audience can tell between Penny, Johnny, Carey, all three of you, the strong leadership you provide in each of your states is crucial on this issue. I think another thing we've heard in terms of the concrete examples you've provided is that there are ways to leverage state assessment data in service of initiatives that you've already been pursuing, but now it's like it sounds like it's even more important to be able to have that information. So now that we've had I think the example of leadership each of you provided, the example of concrete application of test data in your respective states, I'd love to take a moment now to pivot to my colleague, Michelle, who's going to be talking a little bit about what we're seeing across the country in terms of how state assessments are being covered in the media. I don't want to preempt everything that Michelle is going to say. So I'm going to call Michelle, then also I think Carolyn also has a slide that she's going to put up. So Carolyn, you want to do your magic, and then Michelle, I'm going to sort of hand the
virtual microphone
stage
down
to you. Yeah, there you go. For a second, there you go. Perfect.
Thank you. So my name is Michelle Austin, and my focus really is in the communication sphere. And what we've just been able to experience is a really wonderful in-depth conversation with practitioners, about practitioners, and how this work to administer and really thoughtfully use aligned statewide summative assessments has been playing out both in the past, but then also kind of looking forward to the future. And so my gig here is to work to shift our focus to that more national dialogue. So how is this playing out, for example, with the Fourth Estate? And I think anybody participating in an event like this understands that the landscape can be a bit fraught, right? And so on the screen here, you'll see a variety of headlines. We pulled some from states and from national, and like in the chat, I saw language around pressure of parents. You'll certainly see that in some of these headlines. You'll also see kind of the perspective of educators here with the superintendent, a defense, a full-throated defense of the school's need for standardized testing, which I think, some of the rationale we've heard today. And then also just kind of a state of play, a recent article from the Associated Press on participation rates and what does that look like. I think that, it is important as we consider the moment in time that we're in, what that narrative looks like now and perhaps where we want it to go. And so because we've got, it's wonderful we have so many folks participating in this event, we wanted to take a moment to break out into breakout groups to really dig in on three key questions, which you'll see just momentarily, because we know that wherever you happen to sit in the country, the dialogue might have some nuance and some difference. So in your breakout groups, and we're just going to spend 10-15 minutes in breakout groups, how would you describe the current coverage of assessments in your home area from your local paper? We've definitely seen a range, and I think that my job is to help folks see that you can shape some narrative, making sure that we're providing accurate information, we're ensuring that we're inviting media in, that we are being transparent and clear with the information that we have, particularly as we are moving forward into a landscape where those student report cards that we've heard about will be coming out, in the late summer, likely, for some areas, early fall, in a moment where we really can't compare to 2 years ago, right? Because we won't have information from last year, and we'll be looking back 2 years, and this is not a moment where we can do an apples to apples comparison. So in that landscape, how do we shape what that looks like, and how folks should be internalizing that data? So I just showed you a slide around like the headlines that we've seen across the country. I find a helpful exercise to think about, well, what would you have as a headline in your ideal scenario? What would that look like? What would it say? And, it was great in the beginning of the session when Dale asked folks, how prepared you all feel to talk about assessments. And then, how prepared are folks, how prepared do folks feel to tie that kind of data to overall pandemic recovery efforts? The data there was fairly encouraging, but what else is possible that or maybe possible that you all would need? Is that fact sheets, message points, research that could be done? Having that surfaced would be really helpful. This really is a two-way street, as much as the chamber and the collaborative is really interested in bringing together smart people to have this conversation. It is also an opportunity to learn. So in these breakout groups, many will have a staff member, but not all. So we would encourage you all to take a lead in these conversations, and then we'll do a little share, but we definitely want to hear what the answers are in terms of what you're looking for in order to better or more effectively have this conversation. So with that, I think I will turn it to Carolyn to break us all up into our groups.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. We're going to break out into 5 different rooms. And like she mentioned, please have discussion, be willing to share with each other, and then she's going to bring us all back together. Michelle, I believe in about 10 minutes. Is that right?
That sounds right.
Okay, perfect. So we'll send everybody out to the breakout rooms right now. Hey, Dale,
Hey, Carolyn.
can you hear me? I moved you back over here. I hope I didn't cut you off.
That's okay. I was facilitating and I passed it over to one of the participants, but now I've just, from their perspective, I just vanished. I asked a question and disappeared.
Oh, no. Do you need to go back over there? I realized I didn't know if it was letting you move back and forth.
No, I think it's okay.
Dale, are you
Yes.
still going to go over some of the chat questions with Penny for her to answer?
I can. I think originally we were sort of going to huddle all, three of us together. I just don't know if I don't know if we still have time to do that now.
We can, do you want me to pull some of them back in? It looked like all of y'all landed in separate rooms, just not the numbers on what we had assigned. So I think it should work fine.
Yeah, if you can put us all in the same room for like 5 minutes, I'm sure we can land somewhere.
Okay. Let's see. I'm just going to bring them all back right here, if you guys are good with that.
Okay. How about these other folks that are in the room with us?
They did not select to go into the room, so they're not automatically pushed over there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there a way to push us in a room or push them in a room, push Dale and the Chiefs in a room?
Yeah, let me see which one makes the most sense. Yeah, I'm gonna push you all to room 1 again.
Okay.
But then would there be other people in room 1, or is room 1 empty?
There
Because
are.
I think that's the room that I just came from, right? Or no?
It was, yeah. I'm thinking Dale, if I send you back there, you might just go ahead. You can mention to everybody that we're gonna move them to room 2 to wrap up discussion so that you all can collaborate.
Okay.
Is that?
And then if that works, I mean, if that works, and then how much time do we have? Like 5 minutes?
Yeah,
now?
I think still, yeah, about 5 minutes.
Okay, that's cool.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move you, and then I'll put
Do it,
somebody
Dale.
else with you.
Okay.
You can do it, Dale.
All right, Jared, I'm on it.
And
No pressure.
Commissioner Schwinn, you're on here as well. Is that all right to move? We're gonna move you to room 1 so you guys can discuss. Okay. Well, Dale, it won't let me move you back to 1.
Okay, well, so I'm stuck here.
Sorry.
Not I'm stuck here. I love being here with you and Jared. I mean, that's not what I meant at all. That came across fully.
No, you were fine. You were fine.
Okay. Well, it's okay. I mean, I think when we go back in the whole group, we're gonna do like quick sharing, and then I can call out just a couple of the questions from the chat box. We can just dive into them because there certainly are tricky questions that we can get into.
Okay. Do you want me to pull anybody else, either Duncan or Michelle, back in a few minutes early?
In that room with Dale? Just
No, back here to the main room.
oh, sorry.
I mean, I don't have strong feelings on that. I mean, we've got 3 minutes left. At this point, I feel like once we go back into the whole room, like everyone's back together, I feel fine in terms of stepping on the gas.
Okay. Sorry about that. It split differently than I thought it would.
That's okay. At first, I was in the room and I was like, okay, Carey's here, but then there's just some other audience members that are just here. So I was like, okay, everyone just sort of sitting quietly and not saying anything. So I was like, okay, let's jump into these questions. So hopefully, I got through question 1 and 2 before I sort of jumped back here. So hopefully, they just kept going with number 3. Hopefully, if not, maybe they made some friends.
All right, you think I'll go ahead and give them like a 1-minute warning?
Okay.
You're doing great, Carolyn.
Thanks.
I'm working on your Zoom Master certificate right now.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's been a really good conversation, I think.
I think so. Penny, thanks for sharing all your insights from Tennessee. I mean, you guys have really been a leader on this all the way through. So it's just so awesome for folks to hear directly from you.
I appreciate that.
All right, Dale, I'm going to go ahead and hit close rooms, and it'll automatically join everybody in within 60 seconds if they don't click out quicker than that, just so you know.
Okay.
And Dale, you want me to leave this slide up or go ahead and close it out so everybody's a little more just face?
Yeah, just do face to face. We don't need the slide up anymore.
Okay. It's closing out. It's got about 15 more seconds, Dale, and everybody will jump back in.
Yeah, just tell me when everyone's back in.
Okay. All right, everybody's back. Lots more faces.
All right, excellent. Everyone, welcome back. I hope not all of you had the same Zoom breakout room adventure that yours truly had. It was like I had some time travel experiences going on, which is pretty fascinating, but that's another story. All right, so I want to get the state chiefs back in just a moment, but is there anyone, in terms of the conversations you had in your respective rooms, do you feel like, when it comes to the messaging, when it comes to media coverage of state assessments in your respective states, is there anything that you feel very strongly that the mood has now struck you that you would like to speak to the whole group and share what you discussed? I might just call it a one or two people here, but if you want to jump in, this is your moment now. You don't have to raise your hand, Joni. You can go.
Can I just go?
Just go.
I'm not in class.
The mood has struck you, so you are on.
Thank you. I can't remember the gentleman's name. It started with a J, but he brought up a good point to let parents know the reason behind the assessments. And I thought that was really, really good. It's just a lot more clarity. And real quick, my oldest son turns 40 this year, but when he was in kindergarten, the teacher said to me, I wanted to keep him back. And I thought, why? Academically, he was quite intelligent, but his social emotional learning was behind. And now as a grown adult, now I get that. So I think to allow parents to have more clarity of what the assessments are providing would be really beneficial.
Great, thank you, Joni. All right, so thank you for doing that. I want to sort of get Carey, Johnny, and Penny in for the last couple questions. I was looking at some of the ones that the audience asked, and one in particular resonated with me. I had a conversation recently with an education expert who, like Penny, also has kids that are taking assessments. And what this psychometrician said to me essentially was the question of why not just lean on local assessments? And actually, in this case, he actually said that his school, they give iReady, they do mapping, all these things. And he actually feels to be more comfortable in terms of like what those tests are telling about his kids versus a state assessment that's given to, some random, sub pocket of the state's overall population. But there was this question in the chat box as well. I think it was from Veronica. And it says, if the main focus on using assessments is for educators to determine how students are doing so they can remediate, then why not just use local assessments instead? So Johnny, Penny, Carey, any of you three, what are your thoughts on this question of local assessments versus the large scale state exam?
Well, I guess my concern, and I have been vocal about this concern, is that I have no guarantee of knowing that any of these local assessments are aligned to our standards. Let's start with the standards first. I mean, we adopted some very rigorous standards, you know, K-12, ELA, math, science, social studies, et cetera. And we basically said to our teachers, there's no teaching to the test. The teaching to the test is teaching our standards. So if you teach the standards, and we've put out, you know, planning guides and all kinds of things to help teachers do that. But I don't have any guarantee that that the assessments that are being administered at the local level, whether they're locally developed or commercially purchased, are aligned to our standards. And I would hate for parents to get a false positive, if you will, on, you know, on a benchmark and think, oh, everything is great. And then the statewide assessment comes along, which is assessing the standards that the children should have learned, and they don't perform well. That's the reason I brought that up in my very first opening, was saying, if there is a mismatch, then parents need to sit down with the teacher and say, explain to me why this test says one thing and this test says another, because both can't be true at the same time. So that's really my concern. And that's the reason I would love for us to have formative assessments that we know are guaranteed to be aligned to our statewide assessment.
Yeah, similarly, you know, like I mentioned earlier, it's you have to have a system of assessment. It's not just an assessment, a singular point in time event that that makes or breaks a school or a community or a student with the high stakes. You know, we don't have that high stakes assessment in the fashion of, you have to pass it before you move on, or you have to pass this exam before you can graduate. It's been a policy debate, but Arkansas has not done that. So why it's necessary to have that state assessment is so you can understand the impact of policy. It is to help inform instruction. It's also to help us learn what policies not just do we need to enact, but what policies do we need to get rid of? There are things that we have observed here in Arkansas in the last 5 years, and we scratch our heads wondering, why do we do this? You know, whatever was the reason that this was implemented? And our statewide data has helped us understand, look, what we thought this was doing, it's not doing it. So let's get rid of it. So I'd say it has to be part of the overall system. Leaving it just at the local level leaves out some very critical data that is necessary, and you know, we have to keep it in balance.
I agree with both of those points, and I think there's also and this is why communication to parents is so important, and why as states we need to get stronger and stronger in the ways that we effectively communicate with our families. And that's because we've got different assessments that serve different purposes. If I go back to my days as a teacher or principal, I might use some of those local assessments, benchmarks, et cetera, to inform my practice, but the way in which I give them isn't necessarily standardized. And the way I communicate with parents about them is really about kind of that ongoing check on progress throughout the year. It is not a standardized way to look at all students across the entire state, because then you have to try to compare different assessments at different times for different purposes. So in addition to, yes, we have to absolutely think about whether or not they're aligned to your state standards. And yes, we have to think about the ways in which we communicate. I also just feel that underscoring all of that is that as a state, we've got to be able to have one way in which we look at progress and invest. And the rigor of different assessments is very different. And I know, and I'll call it, actually, all three of us are very committed to literacy. And so when we even think about different literacy assessments and universal screeners across the spectrum, they are vastly different in terms of rigor. And so when we think about whether or not a child can read proficiently in any given grade, it totally depends. Those cut scores depend on what assessment they're taking. And now we're making judgment calls, and that makes it a lot more confusing. So I think that there has got to be one assessment that we use as states to think about investment. We have to make sure that it's linked very carefully to usable resources for families. And that is the phase that I think we are in as a country, is we have not yet effectively connected the standardized assessment as a state to something that I can now have in my hands and do with and for my child. And that, I think, once we make that connection, it becomes more meaningful, certainly for families and at the local level. I think it also just speaks to why we've got to be innovative in this space and start to reduce assessment time and make all of our assessments a lot more valuable in terms of informing instruction. But all of those reasons are part of the things that I'm thinking about. And I would just add as an aside, as someone who's third grader takes just about 5 assessments, sometimes 6 different tests for that seem to give me all the same information. Across the board, we have got to do a much better job about how we communicate with families, not just on state assessment, but even on local assessments, because they're getting 75 different data points and putting it all together to say, how do I help my kid? They need to be able to answer that question. Good assessment policy and good assessment practice absolutely answers that question for every family.
Great. All right. Now, as we're approaching the bewitching hour here, I did want to ask one more question to each the 3 of you before I pull up my colleague Adam here to wrap. And I'm going to ask this question in a deliberately broad way. So you can actually grab any portion of the question that you want and pick that portion, answer it, right? But essentially the theme of the question is around like learnings, reflections, right? Very high level. Like we're here talking about assessments, but each of the 3 of you have, you're sitting in the hot seat. And certainly, when the pandemic hit last March, you got pulled into a wormhole, for lack of a better description. You're still sort of being thrown through that hole. But in terms of the challenges we've just started to unpack over the last 75, 80 minutes, like what would be one sort of piece of learning or one piece of advice that you would give? Again, very broad, and just take a couple of minutes, each of you, to answer. And I'll just to make it easier, I'll have Johnny, I'll have you go first, then Carey, and then Penny, I'll have you wrap.
One of the things we've learned is it really didn't learn it, but it is reinforced and was really amplified in the challenges that members of our community have, different segments of our community have with respect to education. The historically underserved populations became more so over the last 18 months, not by choice, but because of situations. We learned that we could come together and meet a lot of those needs in a better way, and that is going to shape, an assessment was part of that, helping us shape what we do going forward to make sure that those students' needs are met, those family needs are met. How do we, from my perspective, how do I change the structure even within my agency? The people, the seats on the bus, who do we have, and are they on the right seat on the bus to really take that data that we have now and work individually with those districts, with those communities to make sure that those students' needs are met moving forward. It also amplified the need for us to double down on literacy because a number of the things we have found is that the students that were having trouble post-pandemic or mid-pandemic, it was because they weren't where they needed to be in reading. And so the things that we've been working on since 2016, it gave us more reason to double down on that and fight harder to come out of the pandemic with even stronger supports.
I think if there's one thing that really was glaring, and Johnny kind of touched on it, is the whole issue of equity. I mean, it was just in your face about the inequitable distribution of resources, the inequity around who had a device, who did not have a device, the inequity around which teachers knew how to use a device and which did not, and which parents did and which did not, and it through no fault of any of the above. And that's one of the reasons that we worked so hard with our legislature last year and got them to appropriate $200 million for our Mississippi Connects initiative. And so we signed contracts in August, and by December the 1st, we had distributed 400,000 devices to every student and every teacher in the state, because we knew and worked to expand connectivity. Connectivity is going to continue to be an issue, whether it's around assessment, whether it's around learning, And connectivity should not be a zip code issue. Connectivity to me is an equity issue, and it is a civil rights issue. Every person in the United States, regardless of where they live, should be connected. So that was the first thing it was just glaring. And although it was something we knew, it was something we just could not avoid. And so now with that confidence level of everybody having a device and connectivity continuing to be expanded, it's now us pivoting to instruction and using assessment to continue to drive instructional practices. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's the magic that happens in the classroom between a teacher and a child. And then how then do we ensure that all parents are well aware of where their children are, and then how can we be developing resources even at the state level to help those parents further help those children at home. So equity continues to drive every single thing that we do in our state, and it really jumped out at us, and our legislature was right there behind us. And so hats off to, it was a team effort, and it will continue to be a team effort.
So I think for me, it's, if I'm giving one kind of piece of advice or how I'm thinking about it, it's hold the line and make it meaningful. One of the things that I think when we come out of something as disruptive as a pandemic is there are things that are innovative, and then there are things that we can lose. And so for us in Tennessee, we know the value of assessment. We've used that year over year over year to continue to accelerate achievement and growth for all of our kids. And assessment is a foundational element of that work. And so that hold the line piece is certainly kind of the guiding force. But the make it meaningful is the ongoing rationale and justification that I think we have to use in order to keep that a contemporary conversation and argument. And so for us, that is at every level. That is saying for policymakers, we need to make that very clear about how we're using assessment in order to guide our decisions. Not just talk about it sometimes, not talk about it in hearings, but actually be very, very public in reports and data transparency to say, this is what the data said, this is what we did with it, and here are the outcomes. That constant reciprocal feedback. At the district level, making sure we are using state assessment data to be able to have conversations around school improvement, around how we give more dollars to certain schools for certain reasons, to justify why we are doing things to help students who might need a little bit more help. And then I think at the parent level, and I'm going to keep going back to that because I do deeply believe that all of our decisions need to be through the lens of children and families and what is best for each individual child and family. But it is that idea that if parents don't understand why their child is having to do something, they're naturally going to say, then I don't think they should be doing it. And that's the responsibility of the state, to be able to make that clear connection for families, make it meaningful for them, so that at the end of the year, they can say, my child took this assessment. Here is what my child and my family got out of that assessment. And if we cannot do that effectively, then we've essentially eliminated the entire argument, because then it becomes meaningless to too many people. So I think it's that hold the line. We need assessment to measure our own progress, but we have to make sure that other people besides policymakers and people who are kind of in that circle of knowing about assessment, we have to make sure they understand the why and the rationale. That is the most important thing that we can do.
Thank you, Penny, Carey, and Johnny. There was between the three of you, in terms of your wrap there was so much wisdom that you guys just imparted. I'm not going to even try to summarize or synthesize it. But what I will do is I will ask Carolyn to put up the poll questions again. Those of you who stuck with us all the way through, congratulations. You know, there will be a door prize at the very end. But wanted to see, like, you've heard a lot. Wanted to see, like, if we've done our job in terms of at least, shedding some more light on each of these questions for each of you. So again, this first question, on a scale from 1 to 4, to what extent do you feel able to make a strong case for why state assessment should be administered this year? Take a moment to fill that in. This one is definitely made progress. I don't remember the numbers. I do remember as there were 1s and 2s on this one at the very beginning. Granted, it's a smaller sample size, but definitely some progress here. So that's great. And the second question, to what extent do you feel able to explain how state assessment data will be used to guide pandemic recovery efforts? This one I remember was there was a sort of plurality between 2 and 3. Let's see how we did here. Yeah, again, lots of great progress here. So we clearly had 3 amazing teachers between the 3 state chiefs here. So Adam and company, make sure those prizes get to our, and awards get to our guests. That was a clear movement in terms of sort of like beginning to end. So awesome. Adam, if I could call you up, if you want to we can sort of tag team shoulder to shoulder as we land this assessment plane that we've been on for the last 87, 88 minutes or so.
My pleasure, Dale. And real quickly for everyone joining us here, and thank you again for sticking through us with us to the end. For those of you unfamiliar with the Collaborative for Student Success, we exist to promote strong education policy and practice, like the strong education policy and practice you have seen exemplified by these 3 states chief school officers. And we work with in-states and with state partners, state chiefs, and in-state advocacy groups to promote that strong education policy and practice. I know that some of you are wrestling with assessment issues and will continue to wrestle with assessment issues throughout the rest of this school year and into future school years to follow. It's possible that we might be able to be helpful, and we want to be. So for starters, we're going to follow up from this webinar with some answers to the tough questions that were raised. You heard them today from the chiefs. We're going to follow up with you in writing and give out those answers so that you have more material to help guide discussions in state. But there's more we might be able to do. So my email and Dale's email are up on the screen here because we want to extend an offer. Reach out to us. We can be helpful with op-eds, letters to the editor. We can help with digital and social media and graphics. We can be helpful with talking points and other materials that you might want or need to be created to, for lack of a better expression, fight the good assessment fight in your state. We're here to help. We want to help. We hope this webinar helped. I know it helped me. It clearly helped some of you based on the poll results, as Dale mentioned. And so please reach out to us if we can be of assistance. And Dale, that's all I'm going to say, and you can take it home from here.
All right, Adam, thank you so much. I've never been good at sort of Zoom applause, but if there was a way to sort of like channel a thunderous applause to you, Penny, Johnny, and Carey, like if there was a button to do that, I would do that. But sort of in the absence of that, just imagine sort of like a standing O, maybe some confetti coming down or something like that. But again, thanks to the 3 of you. I know you're super busy for taking the time. You're 3 leaders that across, that we all look up to, that the nation looks towards, and we're looking forward to sort of to seeing your leadership continue in the months and years ahead. So again, thanks to each of you. Thanks to all the audience members for joining us today, and we hope you've gotten a lot out of this. And just like Adam said, if you need anything from any of us, don't hesitate to reach out, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Take care.